I'm just running from the man that I used to be, man. And this represents everything that was going wrong in my life. This was a time in my life when I reduced myself to animalistic levels. It's memories like these that I bring to my mind when my disease started telling me that staying sober is hard.
In the hood, man, people go through all type of things, man. They have so much adversity and things that we never get a chance to talk about. And a lot of times you may see a person who may be a drug addict, but you don't understand the why. You may just look at them and look down on them. And what can happen is if a person had a mental fortitude and they hold themselves personally accountable, in 10 years, that person that you look down on, you could be on a bus and they could be driving by you in a car, man. So today, I got James Ivy here with me, and I'm gonna ask him a couple of questions, man. The thing that's kind of incredible about his story, man, is that he came from the bottom of the bottom as a drug addict, but then he got himself together, and now he runs a recovery center for drug addicts, man. And in the hood, we see a lot of things like this, man, and a lot of people don't get a chance to speak on it, and a lot of people don't get to see it up close and personal. So this right here is the first episode of Trench Trauma. What was your earliest childhood memory?
When I think back on my childhood, my mind goes to the happy times when I was like at the daycare center that we grew up in called Care Robinson Center for Learning. That's when things was like more simpler in life before you realized what your gender was, what your race was, when life was carefree, when I was just happy, like a kid.
What was family life like for you growing up?
My family life, well, I had a pretty good family life, real religious background, but our family was real structured and everything then. I felt like we was more together.
Okay. What got you into the street life as far as like gangs? Was it the environment or mentality?
Growing up in the neighborhood I grew in, I think it was more the mentality, because to me, that's what I seen, people gang banging, people stealing, the fast life. And that took to me because I came from a structured background with my mother who was real religious. So it was like she had us in a time frame where everything was structured, and in the streets it was less structured and it was more appealing to me mentally and emotionally.
What age did you start smoking and drinking, and when did it turn from light drugs to heavy drugs?
When I first started smoking and drinking, I think it was 8th grade. I remember my 8th grade graduation, we smoked some weed and we drank. And I think it turned after that when I was a teenager, freshman in high school, when my brother was selling the drugs and I ended up seeing the older people use it as recreation. And I thought that was what's happening. And what ended up happening was first I started using it for fun, then I gained the tolerance for it, then I just used to feel normal.
Okay, so that was your freshman year of high school?
Freshman year of high school.
What age did you start selling drugs, and how did it feel to go from, like what you just said, basically using drugs to dealing drugs to using drugs?
What ended up happening was, then I didn't know the nature of the disease, the insidiousness of it. So what ended up happening was, I think I was like my end of my freshman year in high school, my brother was selling drugs, so I ended up helping him sell the drugs. And what ended up happening was, I didn't know that when you bag up heroin and you put it in the blender, you open the blender, the fumes come out. I didn't know that you can catch a habit for that. And as a result of me bagging up heroin every 2 to 3 days, I ended up catching a table habit.
So what was it like going to jail after being on drugs, opposed to once you were there for a while and the drugs were out of your system?
Pretty much what ended up happening was, when I went to jail and stopped using the drugs, I still was locked in the prison in my mind. I was dealing with the obsession of the mind, compulsion of the body, and the phenomenon of craving. Then, so when I would get in jail, I would get clean of the drugs, but my mind it would still be in my mind to use. So what would end up happening was, every time I get out, I would still be in the same mindset mentally, which means that I end up physically going to use the drugs and alcohol. It wasn't until I went to substance abuse treatment, when I hit my bottom, that I stopped having an obsession and compulsion of the drinking and using that drugs and alcohol.
What was your first time like in jail, like your first time ever? What was that experience like for you?
The first time I was in jail, it was more fun, because it seemed like everybody was talking about being in prison. What was cool was what's happening. So it was what I expected it. But once I got there and got locked in the cell and reality set in, it was a little, had me a little afraid, because I was more afraid of the thinking of the consequences and the thoughts of my behavior and being in there by myself.
And what was the craziest thing you saw in jail?
Craziest thing I saw in jail was a guy get raped.
And how did that affect you mentally?
Well, it kind of gave me a little trauma, seeing what the pain and suffering that person went through. But I was able to adjust to it, because things like that you heard about in my environment.
What was your last day in jail like, and when did you know that would be your last time ever going back to jail and you were done with the street life?
I think that would be when they made, when they closed down Joliet and they came up with Stateville, where it was like a holding facility where you was in before you went to the other prison. And I remember being in there, they would feed you these little Lunchable trays, and you would have to wait to the end of the day, eat all your 3 trays together for you to have a meal, and you would have to drink water and tie a sheet around your stomach so you wouldn't get hungry. Once I seen how hard it had got being in there, I knew then. I said to myself, I'm not. It's the pain outweighed the pleasure. It was then that I started to see that wasn't the life that I wanted to live.
When did you know you were done with drug use?
November the 22nd, 08, when my mom brought my son into the crack house and said, "There go your dad. He ain't nothing but a crackhead. Ain't nobody got your back. You got to do this yourself." And it was the look that he had on his face when he seen me, because he was a teenager, and that was one of my greatest fears. My teenage son seeing me a full-blown alcoholic addict, and that day my reality came true. It was then that getting high didn't make sense to me no more. That was when my perception changed.
So actually, that kind of segue into my next question. When your son was murdered, how hard was that on you not to relapse, and what was some of your coping mechanisms?
One of the coping skills that I used was the support groups that I still use today. And one of the main mottos of our group is nothing could be so bad that a drink or drug won't make worse. Because I lose my son, I don't lose my mind. I need my mind for my other son. And I looked at it like all the pain that I felt for my son's death. I looked at it like I was making restitution for all the harms that I put him through by not being there for him, a dad, as a result of the behavior that I was displaying that had me locked up in prison and away from him. So I looked at it as a way back to make restitution for him not using the drugs.
Okay, I understand you work with helping people in recovery. How does that feel for you, being able to make a positive impact on people like that?
One of the greatest gratifications I get out of being a substance abuse counselor is seeing somebody make it through what I made it through. It's funny how you never know what you've been through till you see people that's still suffering with what you made it out of. So for me, my motto is the only way to keep it is to give it away. It's something about being able to help people get over what I experienced that's satisfying to me, mentally, physically, and spiritually.
I know you're helping everybody else stay on the road to recovery, but how do you stay sober yourself?
The way that I stay sober myself today is by staying in contact with people who use drugs and alcohol, and in self-help meetings and in self-help groups. And the reason that I do that is to give myself a constant reminder of what will happen if I use the drugs and alcohol. Because if I don't have a constant reminder of what will happen, my disease will tell me there are no consequences and I end up using. So what I do is take it one day at a time and make sure I take care of the condition of my spirit. Because when it comes to using drugs and alcohol, it's a spiritual condition. And I'm not talking about religion. Religion is for people who don't want to go to hell. Spirituality is for people who've been to hell and don't want to go back.
Okay, so if your 8th grade self came to you for some advice and was asking you, should they smoke and drink that day, what type of advice would you give to them, your younger self, to not make that mistake?
I would tell if that was to occur, I would tell myself to not use, because demons comes along with that. But what I would really tell myself to get to assure myself that I wouldn't do it is that everything that I need is already inside of me. I don't need something outside of me to make me feel whole. All of that's already in me, and that's complete me already.
I know you do a lot of recovery work. How can somebody get in touch with you if they tired of the life they live in and they need some help within the Illinois or Chicagoland area?
Pretty much, I work at a facility called Elite Treatment Facility in Chicago Heights, and we do outpatient there. We got methadone clinics there. We also have recovery homes at that particular facility. But I'm also a person that's in long-term recovery. So what that means is if somebody wanted to get up with me, they could just reach me at jamesivy08@yahoo.com. They could send me an email, and depending on what type of services they need, I'll try to connect them with it.
Now, what do you think is the most important part to keeping that recovery? Because just from speaking to you a few times before, I understand that a lot of people think that it's physical, but it's more of a mental thing to keep recovery. So what's that? Like, give that type of advice.
The advice that I come to rely on when it comes to that is having a connection with my higher power, which I choose to call God. Because one of the things that I know is that when it comes to the disease of addiction, man, I can't go for something outside of me to heal whatever I'm going through. I got to go to the one that made me, and the person that made me is God. So having that spiritual connection, because when it came to using drugs and alcohol, one of the things that I realized is that it was a spirit. Once I put it in me, it turned me to somebody else. That's why my mom used to say, "You're not the son that I raised." That's why my kids used to say, "You're not the dad that I knew." That's why my ex-wife used to say, "You're not the man that I married." That's why them people at the job used to say, "You're not the person that doing none of the stuff that you put on this resume." It turned me into someone else. So I would say the maintenance of my spirit is the most important part of recovery, man.
When I asked you what location we wanted to be at, you chose this house right here on the west side of Chicago. And what's the significance to this place right here?
This represents a time in my life when my perception was off, man. To me, this was like when I was dying, killing myself. This is one of the main reasons why today, man, I put as much energy into saving my life as I did into killing myself, because I'm just running from the man that I used to be, man. And this represents everything that was going wrong in my life. This was a time in my life when I reduced myself to animalistic levels. It's memories like these that I bring to my mind when my disease started telling me that staying sober is hard. Staying sober ain't hard. Sleeping in this abandoned building in the wintertime is hard. Running the extension cord from the light pole to this house is hard. Sleeping with a electric heater with a blanket over my head is hard. Having to hold my urine for 13 hours because it's too cold to get from under the cover to use the washroom is hard. This thought right here, this house, man, is what motivates me. When the disease started trying to tell me that the input on life is hard, man. So this is my motivation, man, right here.
Yeah, man, the work you do is great, man, and I appreciate you taking the time out your busy schedule to do this interview, man. You was the first interview I did, and I kind of know a lot of your story, and so I wanted to like just get a vibe from you, and just so that people can see that no matter what they're doing, they can come out of it. Because I've seen you go through ups and downs, ups, then downs, but up and then stayed up. And even at one of your most at what I would see as one of the most traumatizing times, losing your child, I seen you show the most strength, and that kind of affected me to a point where with some of the things that I go through with my child, where I'm able to just draw strength off that and just be able to say, well, at least I'm here to be able to talk to my child until some of these things get situated. But I mean, the things you do give strength to others.